My name is Seraphina, I'm 28, and I thought I knew my family until a single group text destroyed everything I believed about blood loyalty. The message came on a Tuesday morning. We think it's best if you take a step back for now. The family needs space to heal. Sent to everyone except me, but accidentally forwarded by my cousin who thought I was already included. 23 family members discussing my exile like I was a disease to be quarantined. What I discovered next about why they really wanted me gone would expose a web of lies, theft, and betrayal that ran so deep it would ultimately destroy the very people who tried to destroy me first. Before we dive into this family revenge story that'll make your jaw drop, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a wild ride of family drama that proves karma is absolutely real, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this all unfolds, especially the moment my family realized they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. Growing up, I was always the outsider in my own family. While my brother Marcus basked in the spotlight as the golden child, star athlete, straight A's, parents' pride and joy, I was relegated to the shadows. My achievements were footnotes in the family newsletter that somehow never made it to print. When I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, the family dinner conversation centered on Marcus's intramural soccer trophy. When I landed my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm, they discussed his new girlfriend's cooking skills. The pattern was so ingrained that I barely noticed it anymore. Family gatherings meant watching everyone fawn over Marcus while I helped my mother in the kitchen, listening to endless stories about his latest accomplishments. Seraphina's doing well too, my mother would add as an afterthought, like remembering to mention the weather. I told myself it didn't matter. I had built a successful life despite their indifference. My parents, Robert and Linda, had always been Marcus's biggest cheerleaders. Dad would drive 3 hours to watch his weekend games, but couldn't find time for my college graduation ceremony. Mom kept a scrapbook of his achievements that could rival a presidential library, while my accomplishments lived in a single drawer mixed with old receipts and expired coupons. But I persevered. I excelled in my career, climbed the corporate ladder, and eventually started my own marketing consultancy. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping other people tell their stories while my own family couldn't be bothered to listen to mine. I'd learned early that validation had to come from within, because it certainly wasn't coming from the people who shared my DNA. The extended family followed suit. Aunts and uncles would ask about Marcus's job, his relationship, his plans. I became the family afterthought, the one they remembered to invite but forgot to engage with. Holiday photos featured Marcus prominently in the center while I stood at the edges, literally and figuratively on the periphery of my own family. I channeled my hurt into ambition. Every professional success felt like a small victory against their indifference. When my consultancy landed a major client, when I bought my own condo, when I was featured in a business magazine, these achievements became my armor against their neglect. I stopped seeking their approval and started building my own empire of accomplishment. The worst part wasn't the overt favoritism, it was the subtle gaslighting that accompanied it. When I'd point out the disparity in treatment, I was told I was being sensitive or dramatic. My feelings were minimized, my observations dismissed. I learned to swallow my hurt and present a composed exterior, even as resentment built like pressure in a steam pipe. Little did I know that while I was fighting for scraps of recognition, something much more sinister was happening behind the scenes. The family dynamics I thought I understood were just the surface layer of a much deeper betrayal that would soon explode into the open, changing everything I thought I knew about the people I'd spent my life trying to please. 3 months before the group message that would change everything, my grandmother passed away. Nana Eleanor had been the one person in my family who truly saw me. She celebrated my achievements, remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, and always made sure I felt valued during family gatherings. Her death hit me harder than I expected, not just because I loved her but because I realized I was losing my only family advocate. The funeral was a typical family affair, Marcus giving the eulogy, while I was asked to handle the guest book. Even in grief, the hierarchy remained unchanged, but Nana had always been different with me. During our last conversation, she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're stronger than you know, Seraphina. Don't let them dim your light." I thought it was just grandmother wisdom. I had no idea it was a warning. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Nana's estate attorney, Mr. Richardson. "Miss Torres, I need to schedule a private meeting with you regarding your grandmother's will. There are some specific provisions that require immediate attention." His tone was carefully neutral, but something in his voice made my stomach flutter with unexpected hope. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at his downtown office. I sat across from his mahogany desk, trying to manage my expectations. I assumed Nana had left me something sentimental, maybe her jewelry box or the antique books she loved. I never expected him to slide a document across the desk that would reveal the most shocking betrayal of my life. "Your grandmother left you the majority of her estate," Mr. Richardson said simply. "Approximately $2.8 million, the lake house in Michigan, and her investment portfolio." I stared at the numbers, certain I was misreading them. She was quite specific about her reasoning, which she documented extensively. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Nana's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter that began, "My dearest Seraphina, if you're reading this, then the vultures have finally shown their true colors." The letter went on to detail how my parents had been pressuring her for years to change her will, visiting more frequently as her health declined, and making increasingly obvious hints about their financial struggles. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Nana had discovered that my parents had been intercepting birthday and Christmas money she'd been sending me for the past 5 years. Hundreds of dollars in checks that I never received, cards with cash that mysteriously disappeared. She'd become suspicious when I never thanked her for gifts she'd definitely sent, leading her to do some detective work that exposed their theft. "They told me you were going through a rebellious phase and returning their gifts," the letter continued. "They said you were angry with the family and didn't want contact with me. I believed them until I started paying attention to your social media posts, seeing how successful and kind you'd become despite their lies. That's when I realized they were poisoning the well, keeping us apart to maintain their position as primary beneficiaries." The attorney explained that Nana had quietly changed her will 6 months before her death, leaving my parents and Marcus only modest amounts while ensuring I received the bulk of her estate. She'd even included a provision requiring the will to be read privately to me first, knowing that my family would react explosively to this revelation. As I sat in that office holding proof of my family's betrayal, everything started making sense. Their increased attention to Nana in her final years, their subtle campaign to make me seem ungrateful and distant, their careful orchestration of family dynamics to maintain their favored status. They hadn't just neglected me, they'd actively sabotaged my relationship with the one person who truly valued me. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat. "Your grandmother also left specific instructions about when and how to reveal this information to the rest of the family. She wanted you to have time to process this and decide how to proceed." He handed me another envelope, marked for the family meeting. I walked out of that office feeling like I was living in someone else's life. The grandmother I'd loved had not only seen through my family's manipulation, but had taken steps to protect me from beyond the grave. The money was life-changing, but the validation was everything. For the first time in my life, I had concrete proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't oversensitive, wasn't imagining the dysfunction that had shaped my entire existence. That night I sat in my condo staring at the estate documents, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. My family hadn't just ignored me, they'd stolen from me, lied about me, and systematically alienated me from the one person who might have changed the entire dynamic. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was growing, a cold, calculating anger that would soon reshape everything. Armed with the knowledge of my inheritance and my family's betrayal, I made a decision that would have made Nana proud. Instead of immediately confronting them or revealing what I knew, I chose to let them hang themselves with their own rope. I had learned their playbook: manipulation, lies, and calculated cruelty. It was time to beat them at their own game. The family will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. I called my mother on Tuesday, my voice carefully modulated to sound defeated and confused. "Mom, I got this weird call from Nana's lawyer. He wants me at some meeting Friday. Do you know what that's about?" I could practically hear her exchanging glances with my father through the phone. "Oh honey, that's probably just some formality. You know how lawyers are with their procedures. I'm sure it's nothing important." Her dismissive tone was perfectly practiced, but now I could hear the calculation behind it. "Your father and Marcus are handling all the estate details. You don't need to worry about any of that complicated stuff." I played my part beautifully. "Are you sure?" He seemed to think it was important that I be there. I injected just enough uncertainty into my voice to make her work to discourage me. "Seraphina, you know how Nana felt about your relationship with the family these past few years. I'm sure she left you something nice, maybe some jewelry or books. But the real estate and financial matters, that's family business." You understand, right? The audacity was breathtaking. They were already spinning the narrative, preparing me to accept crumbs while they divided the feast. I agreed to stay away from the complicated meeting, letting them believe their manipulation had worked once again. But here's where my story takes a turn that proves karma doesn't just exist. Sometimes it needs a little help from the people who've been wronged. You know that feeling when you're watching a movie and you're shouting at the screen because the character doesn't see what's coming? Well, my family was about to become those characters and I was holding the remote control. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything. I gathered old family photos showing the obvious favoritism, saved text message threads that revealed their dismissive attitudes, and even recorded a phone conversation where my mother casually mentioned how difficult I'd become and how they might need to create some distance for the family's well-being. I was building a case not for court but for the reckoning that was coming. Friday arrived with all the drama of a season finale. My family gathered at Mr. Richardson's office, dressed in their funeral best, and wearing appropriately somber expressions. I watched from across the street as they filed in, Marcus's arm around my mother's shoulders, my father straightening his tie like he was about to receive an award. Mr. Richardson later told me what happened in that room. He read the will exactly as written, starting with the small bequests to various family members, building suspense like a master storyteller. Marcus received $50,000 and Nana's antique watch collection. My parents were left the china set and $75,000 to split between them. Then came the moment that would live in family infamy forever. To my beloved granddaughter Seraphina Marie Torres, who has shown grace under pressure and success despite circumstance, I leave the remainder of my estate. The silence in that room must have been deafening. Mr. Richardson continued reading the specific assets, the money, the properties, the investments, while my family sat in stunned disbelief. But Nana's masterpiece was yet to come. The will included a detailed explanation of why she'd made this decision, including specific references to the intercepted gifts, the lies about my supposed ingratitude, and her disappointment in how they'd treated me throughout my life. It was a posthumous reckoning that stripped away their carefully maintained facade and exposed them for what they truly were. Marcus was the first to explode. This is insane. Sarah hasn't even been part of this family for years. She doesn't deserve this. My mother reportedly burst into tears, wailing about how unfair it all was, how they'd been the ones caring for Nana, how I'd abandoned everyone. My father, ever the strategist, immediately started talking about contesting the will. That's when Mr. Richardson delivered the final blow. Nana had anticipated their reaction and included ironclad provisions, making the will nearly impossible to contest. She'd undergone psychological evaluation to prove her mental competency, documented her reasoning extensively, and even included a video message explaining her decision. By the time they stumbled out of that office, my family was in complete chaos. Their golden child wasn't so golden anymore. Their financial security had evaporated, and the daughter they'd dismissed as irrelevant had just inherited everything they'd been counting on. But they had no idea that this was just the beginning of their downfall. The group text arrived at 8:47 a.m. on Tuesday, exactly 4 days after the will reading. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop reviewing client presentations when my phone buzzed with what would become the most revealing message in my family's history. The irony wasn't lost on me that their attempt to hurt me would become the evidence I needed to destroy them completely. My cousin Jessica had forwarded it by mistake, thinking I was already included in the family group chat titled Moving Forward. The message thread was a masterclass in manipulation and cruelty that would have impressed a psychology professor studying toxic family dynamics. The conversation started with my mother. "I think we all need to accept that Sarah has made her choice. She's clearly been working against this family for years." Marcus chimed in. "She probably poisoned Nana against us. This whole inheritance thing feels like revenge for imaginary slights." My father, ever the businessman, was more direct. "We need to protect ourselves legally and emotionally. Maybe it's time to cut our losses." But it was my Aunt Patricia who delivered the line that would haunt them forever. "We think it's best if you take a step back for now. The family needs space to heal from this betrayal." The message was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while being utterly devastating. They weren't just excluding me. They were painting me as the villain in a story where I was clearly the victim. 23 family members participated in that conversation. Cousins, uncles, aunts, even my teenage nephew contributed to the character assassination. They dissected my personality, questioned my motives, and shared concerns they'd apparently harbored for years. It was like reading my own obituary written by people who'd never really known me but felt qualified to judge my entire existence. The most shocking revelation came from my Uncle David, who wrote, "Linda told me Sarah has been difficult since college. Always thought she was better than everyone, never grateful for what the family did for her." This narrative they'd constructed was so far from reality that I almost laughed. The daughter who'd been ignored and dismissed was somehow also arrogant and ungrateful. But the real bombshell came when they started planning their response strategy. Marcus suggested, "We should document everything: her lack of contact, her absence from family events, her general hostility. If we ever need to contest the will or defend ourselves, we'll need evidence of her abandonment of family responsibilities." My mother added, "I've been keeping track of her behavior for months. The way she barely calls, how she always seems too busy for family obligations. We can show a clear pattern of rejection and hostility." They were literally creating a fictional version of me to justify their treatment while simultaneously planning to use that fiction against me legally. Reading that conversation was like watching a documentary about my own life, except the filmmakers had gotten every single fact wrong. They'd created an elaborate mythology where I was the antagonist, they were the suffering victims, and my inheritance was somehow theft rather than recognition of their own failures. The cruelest part was how they weaponized my absence from recent family events I'd stopped attending because of their consistent coldness and dismissal. They'd made me feel unwelcome, then used my withdrawal as evidence of my defection. It was gaslighting on an industrial scale performed by people who'd known me my entire life. Jessica's accidental forward came with a panicked follow-up. "Oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I thought you were in the group already. I didn't realize. Please don't be mad at me. I had no idea they were planning this." Her horror at the situation was genuine, and it gave me hope that not everyone in my family had completely lost their moral compass. That night I sat in my condo with a bottle of wine and a legal pad documenting every lie, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty in that group message. They'd given me a roadmap of their conspiracy complete with timestamps and participants. It was evidence of coordinated emotional abuse that would make my eventual response not just justified but necessary. The message had been intended to isolate me, to make me question my own worth, and maybe even give up my inheritance to win back their approval. Instead, it had armed me with everything I needed to expose them for what they really were. They thought they were protecting themselves from me, but they'd actually handed me the weapons for their own destruction. As I prepared my response strategy, I realized that Nana had been right about everything. She'd seen through their manipulation, understood their true nature, and positioned me to fight back. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was power, validation, and the resources I needed to ensure justice was served. My family had spent years underestimating me, dismissing my intelligence, and minimizing my capabilities. They were about to learn that the quiet, overlooked daughter they'd pushed aside had been paying attention to everything, and she was much more formidable than they'd ever imagined. The beauty of perfect revenge is that it doesn't announce itself with dramatic confrontations or heated arguments. Instead, it unfolds quietly, methodically, like a chess master moving pieces across a board, while their opponent remains blissfully unaware of the checkmate approaching. My family had given me everything I needed to destroy them, and I was going to use their own weapons against them with surgical precision. My first move was deceptively simple. I hired a private investigator named Monica Chen, a former police detective who specialized in family financial fraud. "I want to understand exactly what my parents have been doing with my grandmother's money over the past 5 years. I told her, sliding the intercepted gift documentation across her desk. "And I want to know about any other financial irregularities in their dealings with elderly family members." Monica's investigation revealed a pattern that made my blood run cold. My parents hadn't just stolen from me, they'd been systematically exploiting elderly relatives for years. They'd convinced my great-aunt Martha to loan them $30,000 for Marcus's college expenses that was never repaid. They'd talked Uncle Harold into investing in my father's business venture that never materialized. They'd been running a long-term financial manipulation scheme that made my intercepted birthday money look like petty theft. Armed with this information, I began phase 2 of my plan. I reached out to Jessica, the cousin who'd accidentally forwarded the group message. "I need to understand what really happened in that family meeting where they decided to exclude me," I told her during a carefully casual coffee date. "I'm not angry, I just want closure." Jessica was horrified by what she'd witnessed. "Sarah, it was like watching vultures circle a carcass. Your mom was crying about how unfair the inheritance was. Marcus was ranting about how you'd manipulated Nana, and your dad was already talking about hiring lawyers. When Patricia suggested cutting you out completely, everyone just agreed, like it was obvious." But the most revealing detail came when Jessica mentioned something she'd overheard before the meeting. "Your mom was on the phone with someone talking about how they needed to control the narrative and make sure you couldn't poison other family members against them. She specifically mentioned worrying about what you might tell people about how they'd treated you growing up." This confirmed what I'd suspected. They weren't just reacting to the inheritance. They were proactively trying to destroy my relationships with the entire extended family to protect their own image. The group message hadn't been an emotional outburst. It had been a calculated, preemptive strike. My response was elegant in its simplicity. I drafted a letter that I sent to every single family member who'd participated in that group chat, but I didn't send it to the main perpetrators, my parents and Marcus. The letter was a masterpiece of wounded dignity and devastating truth-telling. Dear family, it began. I recently learned about the group conversation discussing my exclusion from family gatherings. While I'm hurt by this development, I think it's important that everyone understand the full context of the situation, including information that some family members may not have shared with you. I then laid out the evidence methodically. The intercepted birthday money, complete with copies of bank records showing the deposits into my parents' account. The lies about my supposed ingratitude toward Nana, contradicted by years of social media posts showing my love and respect for her. The financial exploitation of other elderly family members, documented with bank records and witness statements. But the coup de grace was my inclusion of the original group message thread with a simple note: I believe families should communicate directly rather than behind closed doors. I hope this transparency helps everyone make informed decisions about relationships moving forward. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages from family members who'd had no idea about the deeper manipulation. Uncle David called, his voice shaking with rage. "Sarah, I had no idea about the money they stole from you. Linda told us you'd become distant and ungrateful. She said you were angry about not being Nana's favorite." Cousin Maria sent a long text. "I feel sick about participating in that group chat. Your parents made it sound like you'd been cruel to Nana and were trying to steal money that belonged to Marcus. I had no idea they'd been lying about everything." One by one, the family members who'd participated in my character assassination began reaching out with apologies, explanations, and horror stories about how my parents had manipulated them. The carefully constructed narrative of my villainy crumbled as people realized they'd been fed lies designed to isolate me and protect my parents' financial interests. But my parents and Marcus weren't going down without a fight. They launched a desperate counterattack, calling family members to claim I was spreading lies, that I'd doctored evidence, that I was having some kind of mental breakdown brought on by guilt over manipulating Nana. The problem was that their credibility was already destroyed, and every desperate move they made only confirmed the accusations against them. The final nail in their coffin came when Aunt Patricia, the same woman who'd suggested I take a step back, called me with information that completed the picture. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Your mother approached me 6 months before Nana died, asking me to help convince her that you were becoming problematic. She wanted me to mention concerns about your visits with Nana, to suggest that you were after her money. I refused, but now I realize she was probably asking other people too." The manipulation had been even more extensive than I'd imagined. They hadn't just stolen from me and lied about me. They'd actively recruited other family members to participate in undermining my relationship with Nana. It was a conspiracy that revealed the true depth of their selfishness and cruelty. As the truth spread through the family like wildfire, my parents found themselves increasingly isolated. The golden child status that Marcus had enjoyed for decades evaporated as people realized how he'd participated in the scheme. The respect and sympathy my parents had cultivated crumbled as their financial exploitation of elderly relatives became common knowledge. My perfect revenge wasn't violence or cruelty, it was simply truth. I'd use their own words, their own actions, and their own greed to expose exactly who they really were. They'd destroyed themselves with their own hands while I simply provided the spotlight. 3 months after my letter circulated through the family, the full extent of the damage became clear. My parents and Marcus found themselves completely ostracized from the very family they'd tried to turn against me. The irony was exquisite. In trying to isolate me, they'd isolated themselves so thoroughly that even distant relatives crossed the street to avoid conversations with them. The financial consequences were swift and devastating. Uncle Harold, armed with evidence of their fraudulent business investment, filed a lawsuit that froze their assets pending investigation. Great Aunt Martha, discovering she wasn't the only elderly relative they'd exploited, joined a class action suit that would eventually cost them everything they'd stolen and more. The money they'd counted on from Nana's inheritance was now desperately needed for legal fees. Marcus, the golden child who'd never faced real consequences for anything, crumbled under the pressure. His girlfriend left him when the family financial scandal became public. His job prospects dried up when background checks revealed the legal troubles, and his social circle evaporated as word spread about his participation in elder abuse. The charmed life he'd lived at my expense had become a cautionary tale about karma's inevitable justice. My mother's carefully crafted image as the family matriarch was shattered beyond repair. The woman who'd positioned herself as the moral center of our family was exposed as a manipulative thief who'd stolen from her own daughter and exploited vulnerable elderly relatives. Her attempts to salvage her reputation only made things worse, as each defensive explanation revealed new layers of deceit and callousness. My father, the strategic mastermind behind much of the financial manipulation, faced the most serious legal consequences. The evidence Monica had gathered revealed a pattern of financial elder abuse that attracted the attention of the district attorney's office. His business reputation was destroyed, his professional relationships terminated, and his retirement savings depleted by legal fees and restitution payments. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their downfall was how completely they'd engineered it themselves. Every lie they'd told, every manipulation they'd orchestrated, every cruel word they'd spoken had been documented and preserved. They'd created the evidence that destroyed them, while I simply served as the messenger of their own truth. The family dynamics I'd grown up with were permanently altered. Cousins who'd once ignored me now sought my advice and friendship. Aunts and uncles who dismissed my achievements now celebrated my success and asked about my business. The respect and recognition I'd craved my entire life finally materialized, not because I'd changed but because the truth had been revealed. Jessica became one of my closest allies, using her insider knowledge to help other family members understand how extensively they'd been manipulated. Sarah, I keep thinking about all those times your mom would mention your attitude problems or how difficult you'd become, she told me during one of our regular coffee dates. Now I realize she was preemptively explaining why you might seem upset or distant. She was covering her tracks before anyone noticed how badly they treated you. The inheritance that had started this entire war became the foundation for something beautiful. I used part of Nana's money to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students who'd overcome family adversity. The rest allowed me to expand my business purchase, the family lake house that held so many childhood memories, and build the life I'd always dreamed of without needing anyone's approval or support. 6 months after the group message that was supposed to destroy me, I received a different kind of text from my parents. It was a desperate plea for reconciliation filled with hollow apologies and transparent attempts to manipulate my emotions. They claimed they'd learned from their mistakes and wanted to rebuild our relationship. The timing coinciding with their mounting legal bills and social isolation made their motivations crystal clear. I didn't respond with anger or cruelty. Instead, I sent a simple, dignified reply. I appreciate your message, but I've built a life surrounded by people who value and respect me. I wish you well in your own journey of growth and reflection. It was the kind of gracious response Nana would have been proud of, and it closed the door on that chapter of my life forever. The most unexpected gift of this entire experience was discovering family members I'd never really known. Cousins who'd been overshadowed by Marcus's spotlight, aunts who'd been intimidated by my mother's manipulation, uncles who'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to address it. We formed new bonds based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine affection. As I sit here today looking out at the lake from Nana's house that's now mine, I'm overwhelmed by the complexity of justice and the power of truth. My parents taught me that family loyalty was unconditional, that blood relationships superseded all other considerations, that forgiveness was mandatory regardless of the offense. They were wrong about everything. Real family isn't about shared DNA or childhood history. It's about people who see your worth, celebrate your success, and stand by you when others try to tear you down. Nana understood this, which is why she protected me even after death. The family I've built since this whole ordeal began is stronger, healthier, and more loving than anything I experienced growing up. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you believed about loyalty and love? How did you handle discovering that the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones hurting you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that justice really does exist even when it takes time to arrive. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and building the life you deserve despite the people who try to hold you back. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the family that chooses you is so much better than the family you were born into. Your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value, and karma has a way of balancing the scales when you least expect it. Here's to truth, justice, and the beautiful life that's waiting on the other side of toxic relationships.